Imagine this. You're sitting at home, and in just 5 minutes, the entire planet could be reduced to ash. This isn't science fiction, it actually happened in 1962. For 13 days, the world teetered on the edge of nuclear destruction during what we now call the Cuban Missile Crisis. Today, we're diving deep into the story of how humanity almost ended and how a handful of decisions saved billions of lives. Number 7. The Discovery missiles in America's backyard. The situation started when Washington was startled by pictures taken by American spy planes flying over Cuba. The images showed the covert installation of Soviet medium-range nuclear missiles on Cuban territory. Within 15 minutes of launch, these missiles could have reached nearly every major American city, including New York, Washington, D.C., Chicago, and others. They were not merely symbolic weapons. The American people felt as though their own backyard had suddenly been transformed into a battleground. Even worse, the missiles were placed in a nation commanded by Fidel Castro, who had already turned against the United States and sided with Moscow. For the United States, the discovery was a nightmare situation that required quick action. Number 6. Kennedy's impossible choice. President John F. Kennedy now faced what historians call the most dangerous decision ever placed on the shoulders of an American president. Military leaders urged him to strike fast to bomb the missile sites or even invade Cuba outright. But Kennedy knew that a direct attack could unleash a full-scale war with the Soviet Union, a war fought with nuclear weapons that could annihilate both nations in hours. Instead, Kennedy chose a middle path. He ordered a quarantine of Cuba, essentially a naval blockade designed to prevent further Soviet weapons from reaching the island. It was a calculated risk. Too soft, and America looked weak. Too hard, and it could trigger nuclear retaliation. Kennedy's decision reflected both courage and restraint in an attempt to protect the nation while leaving a door open for diplomacy. Number 5. The standoff at sea. The focus of the globe turned to the Caribbean, where Soviet ships armed with missiles and American warships were engaged in a heated confrontation. The conflict might blow up at any time, according to hourly radio and television reports. Imagine the terror of common people, bomb shelters being dug in backyards by families, duck and cover exercises being practiced in schools, and millions of Americans preparing food, water, and supplies for what they believed to be their last days. The world actually held its breath as Soviet ships got closer to the quarantine barrier. Would they halt? Would the Americans shoot? World War III might have begun at that same moment due to a single miscommunication and a misdirected shot, a hasty command from a captain. Number 4. Khrushchev's letters, hope or threat. As the blockade continued, messages began arriving from Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev. His first letter, emotional and almost pleading, suggested a way out. The Soviets would remove the missiles from Cuba if America promised not to invade the island. For a brief moment, there was hope. But then came a second, much harsher letter. This time, Khrushchev demanded that the United States also remove its own nuclear missiles stationed in Turkey, missiles aimed directly at the Soviet Union. This sudden escalation left Kennedy and his advisors in a bind. Which letter should they respond to? If they ignored the second demand, the Soviets might refuse to back down. If they accepted, it could be seen as weakness and embolden America's enemies. Every option carried the weight of millions of lives. Number 3. The secret deal. Behind the scenes, Kennedy and his advisors worked furiously to find a solution. Publicly, Kennedy chose to respond to the first, softer letter, agreeing not to invade Cuba if the missiles were withdrawn. But in secret, he also agreed to Khrushchev's second demand. The U.S. would remove its nuclear missiles from Turkey, but only quietly and months later, so it wouldn't look like a concession. This delicate balance allowed both leaders to save face. Kennedy could say America had stood firm, and Khrushchev could tell his people that he had secured a deal. The compromise was fragile, but it worked. The crisis was diffused, not by brute force, but by calculated diplomacy. Number 2. The moment the world nearly exploded. What most history books leave out is the terrifying near disaster that happened beneath the sea. During the standoff, U.S. Navy ships dropped depth charges near a Soviet submarine to force it to surface. What they didn't know was that the submarine carried a nuclear torpedo. The submarine's captain, panicked and under immense pressure, wanted to launch it in retaliation. Had he done so, it would have triggered immediate nuclear war. But there was one man on board who refused: Vasily Arkhipov, the second in command. He argued against launching, convincing the others to hold back. That single act of restraint by one man unknown to the world at the time quite literally prevented the outbreak of World War III. Without Arkhipov, we might not even be here today to tell this story. Number 1. The aftermath lessons of survival. When the crisis finally ended, the relief was overwhelming. Khrushchev withdrew the missiles from Cuba, Kennedy lifted the blockade, and the world stepped back from the edge of destruction. But the lessons were impossible to ignore. Both nations realized that nuclear weapons left no room for error. In the years that followed, Washington and Moscow installed the Red Telephone Hotline, a direct communication link between the White House and the Kremlin, so leaders could talk instantly in times of crisis. The Cuban Missile Crisis taught the world that when nuclear powers collide, survival depends not on who has more weapons, but on who has the wisdom to pull back before it's too late. For 13 days in 1962, humanity stared into the abyss. The Cuban Missile Crisis wasn't just a battle of missiles, it was a battle of nerves, of diplomacy, and of human judgment. It showed us how close we came to ending civilization, and how fragile peace really is. And perhaps the most chilling lesson of all, that sometimes the fate of billions can rest on the decision of just one person. If this story opened your eyes, don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more powerful history stories, and share it so more people learn just how close we came to the end of the world. History doesn't just live in books, it lives in the choices we make.